Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, Xi Jinping calls on China and Jordan to deepen alignment of development strategies. China's Vice President Han Zheng meets with India's National Security Advisor ahead of border talks. The United States issues global warning regarding economic D-Day against Iran. China proposes formulating at least 100 key standards for the humanoid robots industry by 2028. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called on China and Jordan to further deepen the alignment of their development strategies. He made a remark in a meeting with Jordanian King Abdullah II in Beijing. Xi Jinping said China and Jordan should deepen cooperation in traditional fields such as trade and infrastructure, while expanding new cooperation in areas including the digital economy and artificial intelligence. King Abdullah II said Jordan is formally committed to the One China principle and is willing to deepen ties with China in manufacturing, agriculture, and technology. The leaders also exchanged ideas regarding the situation in the Middle East. President Xi Jinping stressed a political settlement of the Palestinian issue, the principle of Palestinians governing Palestine, the protection of civilians, and fairness and justice. The King of Jordan said Jordan is willing to maintain communication with China and make efforts to ease tensions in the region. King Abdullah II is currently on a state visit to China. China and Jordan have issued a joint statement regarding deepening their strategic partnership. So for more on this, joining us now on the line is Dr. Wang Jing, a Middle East expert. So thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Wang.
It's my great pleasure.
The state visit marks King Abdullah II's ninth visit to China since his accession to the throne. It is also taking place more than a decade after the establishment of the strategic partnership between China and Jordan in 2015. Why do you think the two nations enjoy close ties right now?
I think the two countries' relation is very particular because both countries cherish the friendship and the cooperative opportunities with each other. On the one hand, the two countries has very strong, solid foundation with each other and they trust each other. I mean, politically, for example, the two countries share a lot of the common ideas over international as well as regional affairs. And they have the shared understanding of what should be done and what is highly needed for the regional security and stability. And also, if we look at economically, that the two countries has already established a very strong economic ties, as you mentioned, that Jordan has already joined the China Belt and Road Initiative, and Chinese companies have a lot of ties and projects inside Jordan. More and more cooperative areas are created. So that's one side. And also on the other side, the two countries have a lot of potential for future cooperative and expanded cooperative opportunities, concentrating not only on the traditional, for example, the bilateral economic and the transactions, but also could be expanded to the green energy, the AI, artificial intelligence, as well as the big data technology and others. So that's why I think the two countries has very strong, solid historical ties, and also the two countries cherish and understand the highly necessary to further expand the opportunities of cooperation between each other. So that's why we call that the two countries' relation is important, and these relations will be further expanded and will be further upgraded.
How can China and Jordan further align their development strategies, in your opinion?
I think a lot of things could be done. The very first thing is that they could create a new mechanism. The mechanism is based upon the political trust and the political understanding with each other, which has been very, very strong and solid. And the second is that both countries, they will have a lot of social connections with each other, particularly if we look at what happened during the past 10 years. China and Jordan has already established different levels, different layers for social communication, social networks, which are very high, which are very crucial for the foundation of the bilateral trust and bilateral cooperation. And the last but not least, I think new areas could be further expanded and further cooperated between each other, such as high technologies, big data, artificial intelligence, as well as, for example, space technology and other cutting edge technology areas. China has a strong potential and strong capabilities to develop into these areas where Jordan are highly needed these new technologies and hope to combine these technologies into their own national development. So that's why I think a lot of things could be done. So that's why the two countries' bilateral relation now faces new opportunities, which could be the kind of the guiding role for the future development of the bilateral relation between China and Jordan.
Now, as a matter of fact, the King of Jordan this time around started his visit to China in Shanghai and Shenzhen, where he has taken a look at leading Chinese companies' innovations regarding robotics, air transport solutions, logistics services. He has also met with the representatives from the Chinese travel service provider Trip.com group. What do you think his agenda in Shanghai and Shenzhen? Tell us about Jordan's focus in terms of seeking cooperation with China.
I think it suggests a lot of things because Shanghai and Shenzhen, you mentioned they are a very important hub for Chinese reform and opening up policies. And also Shanghai and Shenzhen are the very important centers for Chinese economies where a lot of high-tech enterprises as well as a lot of the high-tech companies are developed and grown up from these cities. So that's why this shows that on the one hand, visits to Shanghai and Shenzhen will show the China's achievement of reform and opening up policies during the past decades. And also on the other hand, it will shows the possibilities for the cooperation between China and Jordan for the two countries' companies, for the two countries' investments, for the two countries' cooperation. I think one of the things we should understand is that Shanghai Shenzhen is also the very important basis for China's ambition for the artificial intelligence, for the big data, and for the other cutting-edge technologies. So that's why Jordan will maybe, to some extent, find new areas for cooperation during the Jordan's King Abdullah II's visit to the two cities, and also the two cities will show their hospitalities to the king as well as to our guests from Jordan during the trip.
Energy is actually one particular focus in terms of the China-Jordan cooperation. Over the past 1 decade, nearly 89% of China's $3.56 billion investment in Jordan went to the energy sector. That's according to the Jordan News Agency. That's their official news agency. Traditionally, we understand Jordan is actually very much reliant on imported natural gas. So with that in mind, in what ways do you think working with China can help advance the country's energy diversification?
I think as you are right, because although Jordan is a Middle Eastern country, but it's not a country with rich energy resources. With natural gas resources or with oil resources. Jordan is not that kind of country. So that's why Jordan has to import a lot of the natural gas from the neighboring countries, particularly from Israel, and also it has to import a lot of the oil from the Gulf Arab states. So that's why for Jordan, it's highly necessary to seek new areas for, on the one hand, to ensure that their energy security based upon the natural resources, the gas, as well as the oil. And also, on the other hand, to seek the opportunities for develop other important resources of energy, such as the green energy. This green energy needs not only infrastructure, but also the high tech to support the further development of the green energy. So that's why, based upon these two sectors, I think China and Jordan has a lot of things that could be done. On the one hand, that China could, of course, with Jordan together to establish more advanced facilities for the oil and the natural gas, redefine as well to preserve So these experiences are highly fruitful inside China. So China could do something more like that. And also on the other hand, if you look at the future, that China has a lot of very, very strong experience over the green energy development, green energy infrastructure construction, then these experience could also be learned and be transferred into Jordan to be modified to fit the local demands. So that's why I think these things would be highly necessary, and I do believe that the two countries will have a strong potential to further work close with each other.
Regarding regional issues in the Middle East, how much does President Xi Jinping's assurance on Beijing's support for the two-state solution for the Palestinian issue matter to Jordan, in your opinion?
I think that China and Jordan has a lot of things we shared understandings over the Palestinian issue. The Palestinian issue right now, the two most urgently needed address the thing is that one is the things in what is happening in the Gaza Strip. That is, according to the consensus of the international community, that Israel should suspend military activities and should withdraw from the Gaza Strip, while the Gaza Strip should be transferred back to the authority led by Palestinian people themselves. So that's why these things need a very solid international core, as well as mediation, as well as other assistance from international community. And also the other one is what is happening in the West Bank. I mean, if we look at what is happening in the news, Israel is further expanding their Jewish settlements in the West Bank and squeeze the room for the local Palestinian people, their living room, their daily room of necessities. So that's why for China and Jordan, both of the countries has already strongly stressed that Israel should suspend these kind of activities and should go back to the negotiation table with Palestinians to seek the peace solution to the conflict through equal and just dialogue. So that's why I think China and the Jordan stances are very close to each other, and Jordan and China would continue to work closely with each other to find a solution to end the problem in the Gaza Strip, to find the ways to help facilitate Israel and Palestinian negotiation.
Yeah. In the meantime, China and Jordan have also called for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to shipping and for the ceasefire between the United States and Iran to be maintained. How much weight does this joint voice carry?
I think it is important. We cannot say that these voices would really determine what Iran will do, and we will determine what the United States will do. But it's an important thing, because for China and Jordan, which are important states in the international community and also have a strong influence not only from international level but also in the Middle East level, these two countries' voices, shared voices, means that the international community has already got the very shared understanding of what should be done. That is, on the one hand, to ceasefire, and also on the other hand, to try to find a chance to bring the United States and Iran back to the negotiation table to end all the conflict based upon the peaceful way rather than the military way. So that's why I think these things are highly urgently needed, and maybe these things cannot end the conflict immediately. That represent the kind of the trend supported by international community. So that's why the voices still work, still are important.
Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Wang Jing, a Middle East expert. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Welcome. I am Chu Zhang, Deputy Director at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. On the World Today program, we will dive beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, trends, and impacts that connect states across the globe. Join me on World Today.
You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Chinese Vice President Han Zheng has called on China and India to view and handle bilateral ties from a strategic, long-term perspective and work together to implement the important consensus reached by their leaders. He made a remark in a meeting with Ajit Doval, India's National Security Advisor in Beijing. Han Zheng said China and India should enhance strategic mutual trust, tap the potentials for cooperation, maintain close multilateral coordination, properly manage their differences, and promote the sustained and stable development of bilateral ties. For his part, Dova said as the world's two most populous and fastest growing major economies, India and China have a historic opportunity for cooperation. He added that India stands ready to work with China to deepen mutually beneficial cooperation, properly address the boundary question, and make new progress in their ties. Dova is also India's special representative regarding the China-India boundary question. So joining us now on the line is Sultan Ali, a retired Air Force officer and author in Pakistan. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're most welcome. It's my pleasure to be with you.
So this meeting came a day before China and India held their 25th round of talks between the special representatives on the boundary question. What are the key messages that you heard from the meeting?
Well, Ding Heng, the meeting ahead of the 25th round of boundary talks, it sent a very clear signal. Both sides want to stabilize ties and create a constructive atmosphere. It showed commitment to dialogue, underscored the importance of managing disputes responsibly, and conveyed that broader cooperation should not be derailed by differences. Therefore, in answer to your question, the key messages are strategic signaling. The timing underscores that both sides want to create a constructive atmosphere before formal boundary negotiations. And the commitment to dialogue. Han Zheng's engagement with Ajit Doval highlights China's emphasis on managing disputes through institutionalized channels rather than confrontation. And the broader message comes that the meeting conveys that while differences remain, both countries recognize the needs to stabilize ties and prevent border issues from overshadowing cooperation. I'm reminded of Mahatma Gandhi's quote, peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to cope with it.
So, do you agree that India and China now have a historic opportunity for cooperation?
Indeed, there is a historic opportunity. China and India, they represent nearly 3 billion people and two dynamic economies. And if they choose cooperation over confrontation, they can reshape Asia's trajectory. They can address shared challenges like climate and energy, as well as strengthen global governance. With China and India representing nearly the 3 billion people, as I said, of the two fastest growing economies, cooperation could reshape Asia's trajectory. And both nations, they face common challenges, as I just mentioned, and the historic opportunity exists, but it requires political will to prioritize long-term strategic gains over short-term nationalistic impulses. In fact, Han Zheng's visit aligns directly with President Xi Jinping's vision articulated through the Global Security Initiative and the Global Development Initiative. The Global Security Initiative calls for common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security principles that resonate with India's own emphasis on peace along the border as a prerequisite for improved ties. The Global Development Initiative, meanwhile, emphasizes inclusive growth, poverty alleviation, and sustainable development, areas where China and India can collaborate to uplift millions across Asia.
Now, we know the mechanism for talks between the special representatives regarding the China-India boundary question was established in 2003, more than 20 years ago. What do you think this mechanism has contributed over the years?
Well, good point, Ding Heng. The mechanism has provided a structured channel to manage disputes. Now, it has not produced a final settlement, but definitely it has prevented crisis from escalating. It has built confidence and ensured that dialogue continues even during tense periods, and its value lies in keeping communication alive. The mechanism has provided a structured platform to manage disputes, preventing crises from spiraling out of control. And even without a final settlement, it has fostered communication, reduced misperceptions, and kept dialogue alive during the tense periods. Now, while not delivering a breakthrough, it has contributed to stability by ensuring that both sides they continue talking rather than disengaging.
India's Foreign Minister S. Shankar on Saturday emphasized that peace along the border is essential for improving ties with China. So, are you confident that peace can be maintained?
You see, it is a thought-provoking question.
Okay.
Peace can be maintained if both sides adhere to agreements and they avoid unilateral actions. Now, as Minister Jaishankar noted, peace is essential for improving ties. Both governments understand the cost of escalation and the benefits of stability, which gives reason for cautious confidence. And confidence stems from the fact that both governments understand that the cost of escalation and the benefits of stability.
Now, despite the positive momentum of bilateral engagement, India has still somehow taken some gestures or some actions recently along the border with China. For example, earlier this month, the Indian side announced what it called standard names for 27 locations in the so-called Arunachal Pradesh, also known as the Jiangnan region on the Chinese part. How can India avoid creating new disputes over border issues, in your opinion?
Well, you see, moves like renaming the location, it risks inflaming tensions and undermining dialogue. The constructive path is to address concerns through the boundary mechanism rather than unilateral symbolic acts. They may be playing to their own gallery. But please remember, restraint and confidence building are the way forward to avoid creating new disputes. And India should channel concerns through the boundary mechanism rather than unilateral symbolic acts. Now, the bottom line here is simple but profound. China and India cannot afford to be prisoners of their disputes. Their destinies are intertwined, and their cooperation is not just desirable, it is imperative for Asia's stability and the world's future. The visit reminds us that diplomacy, when pursued with patience and vision, can transform rivalry into partnership and uncertainty into opportunity.
That's a very nice vision. So, Harley, as we take a look at the current trend where China and India are moving to stabilize their relationship step by step, momentum has been building, that's for sure. What do you see as the geopolitical or strategic necessity for this trend if we take a look at the global situation, take a look at the regional situation, for example, the fallout of the ongoing U.S.-Israeli war against Iran?
Well, again, that is a very interesting observation by you. Unfortunately, India and China are in opposite views of this particular, war, or shall we say, the standoff in Western Asia. India chose to side with Israel as well as with the United States of America. China, on the other hand, it has been professing that both sides must maintain restraint as well as opt for talks and negotiations rather than confrontation. And India continues to provide weapons to Israel and so on. But unfortunately, it has not borne any results as yet. But please remember, both China and India, they have pledged closer coordination in multilateral forums such as BRICS, SCO, and the G20. And their combined weight in these two platforms can influence debates on reforming international institutions, not only the war in West Asia, but also addressing the challenges to humankind like climate challenges and ensuring equitable global development.
The common interests are just way too many between New Delhi and Beijing, that's for sure. But thank you very much for joining us, Sultan Ali, joining us from Pakistan. You are listening to World Today. We'll be back after a short break. You are back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. China and Switzerland have completed their free trade agreement upgrade negotiations, signing a memorandum of understanding in Bern. The two sides say they are committed to greater two-way openness in goods, services, investment, and rules. The original FTA signed in the year 2013 was China's first with a European continental country. Officials of the two sides are hailing this upgrade as a milestone that provides stable and transparent institutional guarantees for businesses. Both sides are going to proceed with domestic procedure towards official signing. For more on this, my colleague Zhao Yang earlier spoke with Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation.
Dr. Zhou Mi, thank you very much for joining us. China and Switzerland have completed negotiations to upgrade the FTA after 5 rounds of talks. So what does this tell us about the two countries' commitment to free trade at a time of rising protectionism and global uncertainties?
Well, as you mentioned, that's 5 rounds of negotiations or talks is not that long. So it's not that long compared when we were trying to negotiate a free trade agreements with other partners. I think that reflects a very strong intentions of both China and Switzerland on improving the mechanical settlements between our two countries for the trade and investment. So the protectionism is a very important factor when we are saying that uncertainty is coming from the trade to the investment. And under such kind of uncertainties, we need to try to find a better mechanism to assure the companies who are trying to involve in this international trade. China and Switzerland, we are one of the earliest members of the EU who signed agreements with each other. I think that is an important thing because Switzerland is not part of EU, but it has very strong connections with EU. So we signed agreements, and that agreement has given the world many confidence that China and Switzerland can do more to improve the market access of this trade and also for the services and the investment. I think that is definitely important.
And as you mentioned, Switzerland was the first continental European country to sign an FTA with China back in 2013. So why has this partnership been significant over the past decade?
Well, Europe is an important part of the world, and most of these countries are developed. So for the development stage, they do have many companies who are having the strong competitiveness compared with Chinese companies at that time, maybe 13 years ago. But Switzerland is a country to be more neutral in the neutral positions, and it's a little bit independent compared with other EU countries. So they want to stick to the relations and cooperations with China. So in the year of 2013, when we started or when we finished the negotiation of this agreement, I think it has given a very clear signal to the EU that we want to have a better connections with the EU market. So this market is strengthened. The Switzerland is quite famous for many of its industries, like for the watch, making, and also for the tourism and education and the insurance. So China is a really large market for the manufacturing and the consumption. The signature of the free trade agreements between these two countries has provided so many opportunities to the other side. So based on that, we are improving or update the agreement and trying to fit for the new situation of the world, and we want to strengthen the collaboration between our two parts.
And now the upgraded agreement promises higher standard opening in goods, services, investment, and trade rules. So tell us more details of it. How will it benefit both of the two sides?
Well, yeah, as we just said that, 13 years ago, we signed the first or the original agreements between our two countries. And during those time, because we really want to finish that agreement in time, so we didn't, take too much negotiations on some very difficult part. Like for the Switzerland, we know that Switzerland is really famous for its watches making. So we really want to learn from them. I think that this is a key issue, and they also want to, benefit from the cooperation based on their advantages. And for the services, the financial services, insurance services, education services are really good for Chinese companies to follow. So after 13 years, the world has changed, and I mean, it doesn't have to be that everything is much better compared with 13 years ago, but it provides us with more opportunities. Like when we are discussing the tariff issues, maybe in the past we didn't have the idea of the AI products, so the artificial intelligence related products, but now we are having that. If we are going to support the development of that, maybe we need to, to lower the tariffs in that category. Well, for the services, China, nowadays we are trying to strengthen the development of services industries a lot. So we welcome more investors from other countries, including Switzerland, if they can benefit from the bilateral market access, the commitments by China. I think that these suppliers, service suppliers from Switzerland, can enjoy a very strong and sustainable market in China. As for the investment and also the standards, I think that China is also willing to establish a better, mechanism to discuss the related issues with Switzerland.
And beyond bilateral ties, so what message does the China-Switzerland FTA upgrade send to Europe more broadly?
Well, it's getting a very clear signal that China is willing to, to open our market. We have these commitments before, like President Xi mentioned in Davos in the year of 2017. I think that is a really important messages, and the messages can be heard. And I think that most of the European countries should believe that. We are not just trying to make the use of the rules and trying to go into other markets. We also want to do what we can do to help them. Like for the investment in the renewable energy sectors, Chinese companies are really good at that. So we can go to Switzerland, and we also can go to EU to help them to improve their renewable energy industries. So we want to establish a better mechanism, not just trying to accuse the other side by abusing the using of the rules. But instead, we need to establish a better mechanism to ensure all the related stakeholders and the concerns can be addressed.
And as you mentioned, China-EU economic relations currently face both opportunities and challenges. So could Switzerland serve as a model for pragmatic economic cooperation?
I think so, because Switzerland has a similar stage, in the development compared with some of the Western European countries. But maybe it is a little bit different in the advantages of its sectors and resources. But other EU countries can also benefit by the differences of the different countries. Well, there was an argument say that how could EU fund its export targets to sell to China? I think that we can see Switzerland. Although Switzerland products are very expensive, like for the chocolate, for the watches, they are very popular here in Chinese market. So it doesn't only about the prices, it's about the popularity, it's about its brand, about how these countries' attitudes towards Chinese market are really affecting Chinese consumers' decisions. So we can do more to try to think complementary, and we can use some mechanism to deal with the differences. No countries can just be exception. We are going to support the development by both sides to have a better China-EU relation. I think that is very necessary, especially for EU right now.
And both China and Switzerland, the two sides emphasize support for a rule-based international trading system. So what role can the bilateral and regional FTAs play at the current global trading environment?
FTAs are the bilateral mechanism, as you just mentioned. Bilateral mechanism has one advantage, that is flexibility. So we can reach the bilateral agreements in a much easier and much quicker way. And under such kind of circumstances, I would still say that WTO, the multilateral system, is a basis. is the very important thing we need to follow. But if we are going to try to adapt to the new situations, like some of the new development, we need to take care about the bilateral ways of dealing the problems. So I think that the FTA is very important for all the WTO members. We know that all the WTO members of 165, they already have at least one FTA or regional trade agreement, RTA. So it means that they are using this mechanism to trying to improve the relations with other countries or economies. I think that is definitely what we need. That is a certainty instead of some uncertainty and protectionism. We need to do more to facilitate the trade and improve the cooperation with other economies and the members of WTO.
Dr. Zhou Mi from the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, talking with my colleague Zhao Yang. This is World Today. We'll be back. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The United States has announced a major expansion of economic sanctions against Iran. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent unveiled the measures on Monday, targeting sectors including nuclear energy, missiles, cyber, and oil. Bessent vowed to cut off Iran's economic lifeline, warning any entity that helps Iran will be barred from the U.S. dollar system. Iran has called the sanctions an illegal economic war that violates the principle of sovereign equality under the UN Charter. Tehran has vowed to use every tool and capacity possible to defend its national interests as well as the rights of the Iranian people. So for more on this, my colleague Gao Yingshi spoke with Dr. Wen Jing, research fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy with Tsinghua University.
Washington is calling this the D-Day of its economic sanctions against Iran. So why is the United States escalating so dramatically at this moment? And what is it really trying to achieve?
I think the new round of U.S.-Israel-Iran conflict, as we all know, has been going on for almost 6 months, yes. And the war has not developed in the way I think Donald Trump hoped and always expected. At first, the goals Washington set at the beginning have not been achieved. There's no region change. The war is not going on the way Donald Trump hopes. So that's the first point. So at the same time, Trump is facing growing pressure, I think, both internationally and also at home. First, we see internationally. I think the closure of the Strait of Hormuz actually has caused major disruptions in global energy market. And we can see U.S. has faced criticism from some of its allies, Korea, or we see Japan, also European allies. So this is from internationally. And domestically, we can see oil and other prices have surged, right? We all know that the midterm elections coming soon in November. I think he's under considerable pressure on these two fronts. So I think this is very important. So I think right now, the real purpose of this so-called economic D-Day is not simply to make Iran pay an economic price. I think it's trying to use this as a way to bring Iran to the table, to continue the dialogue, to make a deal. So I think this is what Donald Trump really looking for.
And how much will these kind of new measures actually hurt Iran's economy? And can Tehran handle them as it has before?
Iran probably can. Why? I think because we can see the past 6 months of intense military pressure actually have demonstrated Iran's strategic resilience, right? Actually, I visited Iran last November, just before the conflict. And at least during my stay in Tehran, I can see the social order was stable and the people was able to carry on with their daily lives as normal. So this is what I saw when I paid a visit to Tehran. And the second thing I want to say, Iran has been dealing with U.S. tax sanctions for decades. Not today. They had lived with U.S. sanctions for many, many years. So actually, Iran was familiar with this kind of sanctions. So they have their own system of intermediaries. I think over the next maybe a half years or 1 year, I think Iran is likely to continue this kind of informal financial channels to reduce its reliance on the US dollar, or we say the Western financial system. So I think Iran probably will increase trade settled in yuan with the renminbi and other currencies. I think will rely more heavily on neighboring countries or other ASEAN markets. So I think it does not mean Iran can completely escape dollar system, but I can see he will reduce the share of its economy that is directly exposed to US financial sanctions. We can see like it's basically about resilience rather than resistance. So this is my take.
Besant hinted that Chinese banks could become targets. Well, China responded that sanctions and pressures will not solve the problem, urging a return to dialogue and warning that China will protect its legitimate rights. So, do you think Washington's action is putting the strategic stability with China at risk?
Actually, I think this is not a good thing. As we all know, the Chinese and the US leaders met in Beijing in May this year and defined our bilateral relationship as one of the constructive strategic stability relationship. Based on his latest remarks are still quite vague. He's not said that Chinese banks will be sanctions, but I do think this is a test. He wants to test the limits of this strategic stability between China and the US. Firstly, the US has already extended its pressure on Iran into the China-US relationship. Now I think he is doing a way to just crack China into this conflict. China is an important trading partner of Iran. Everybody knows that. And I think Washington is also well aware of that. So this issue absolutely touches upon a very sensitive area of China-US economic relationship. And secondly, I tend to think that this is not really about launching like a confrontation with China. Rather, I think it is an attempt to use like pressure to bring about change. Donald Trump faced pressure internationally and also domestically. So I think Washington may want to use this advantage in the dollar system, right? The global financial system, and want to access to the US market to pressure China and other trading partners of Iran to reduce these economic ties with Tehran. So in other words, I think US may be hoping that the threat of like secondary sanctions will be enough to achieve these objectives. So I think this is actually a test. Furthermore, I want to say it's very dangerous. This action is very dangerous because we all know that strategic competition between China and the US actually has existed and intensified for many, many years. And both sides actually been trying to maintain a certain degree competition, but without losing control, right? If the US were to start like sanctioning major Chinese banks, so I think this issue could quickly escalate from economic and trade dispute into a broad strategic confrontation. So I think China absolutely will not accept this action. So I think it's very dangerous.
The United States framed this as a final warning to end the nearly 6 months conflict. Does it bring a resolution any closer, or does it risk deepening the standoff?
It could either become the final pressure needed to bring the two sides back to the table, but it would also have a tension, to further deepen the stalemate, because it really relies on how Iran interprets or understands this final warning, and whether US is willing to leave Iran a diplomatic way to handle this issue. It's very clear that based on Iran's statement so far, Tehran sees this as a threat, right? Iran may believe that US is not ready to seeking negotiation, but rather trying to force Tehran to make concessions. That could actually push Iran to take an event harder line, I think. But at the same time, I think the US has not used the threats as a tool in negotiation. This is very normal in US history. We saw this big research about Obama's 8 years in handling Middle East issues. We can see that it's a very normal tool in negotiating in US foreign policy. So we saw this during Obama's administration as well. So I think the key problem here is the lack of strategic trust between the two sides. So what Washington sees as a negotiating tool may be interpreted in Tehran as a final threat. So in that case, I think Iran may have little intention to compromise and may instead choose to continue absorbing this like economic pressure. So that's why this bridge, I think Pakistan and other regional countries, their communication role is so important because they can help clarify like US and Iran, each side's intentions. It can prevent the negotiation signal into like misunderstood. So I think this is why Pakistan is so important right now. So this is my take.
Dr. Wen Jing, research fellow with the Center for International Security and Strategy, Tsinghua University, speaking with my colleague Gao Yingshi. You are listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. China has proposed formulating at least 100 key standards for the humanoid robot industry by 2028. The proposal is part of a draft guideline from China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. The proposed standards would cover areas such as methods for capability testing and evaluation, platforms and systems, application scenarios, and safety governance. The draft says the rapid development of humanoid robots has created an urgent need for common standards to guide innovation, product development, and large-scale application. So joining us now on the line is Dr. Yao Shujie, Changkong Professor of Economics with Chongqing University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello.
So, Professor Yao, China aims to have over 200 enterprises implementing these 100 new standards by 2028. Will this standardization process lower entry barriers for smaller tech startups? Or do you think it will end up, say, consolidating power among a few dominant players, for example?
It could be a mix of the different outcomes because the humanoid robotic development is very rapid over the last few years, and China is becoming a leading international developers of these kinds of machines. The technology, the product complications, and also the scope of application is getting wider, as we can see in the second international sport games played by the humanoid robots in the last few days, and it's still continuing. Now, this kind of development means that the technology level, the sophistication of the robots is now developing beyond our imagination. And the regulation has been relatively slow, especially the standard is probably slower than the actual development of the humanoid robots. So it is an urgent need for the national and international standard for this kinds of development, not only for the technological guidance, but also for the safety of the applications of the humanoid robots in different areas. So the 100 standards, which is probably the minimum standard that we are considering for the next couple of years, which will be rolled out in 2028 and apply to the major player in the domestic market in China. But because China exports the vast majority of these kinds of machines to the rest of the world, I think China's action on setting up this standard would have a very wider implication, not only for the domestic development, but also the cooperations of the technology in the rest of the world. And the specialized makers, I think they have to meet the standards. I think that means it could be a little bit more challenge for the smaller startup, the smaller company, but it could also open up the scope for the very specialized, company. For example, they produce the components which meet the standard. They don't necessarily have to be very large, but they need to be specialized and very, efficient in the international and domestic competition.
Yeah.
So it could be both for the larger and the smaller enterprises to enter the market.
Let's talk about another question. I mean, currently more than 100 humanoid robots related standards are already either under development or under preliminary research in China and abroad. So how might China's standard setting procedure or process influence global supply chains? For example, there could be a concern on the part of some people that China's national standards could act as a technical barrier to trade. For example, they will make it harder for some foreign-made humanoid robots to enter the Chinese market. Does that represent a legitimate concern, in your opinion?
I don't think so, because as China have to have a standard which could be recognized internationally, they actually open the scope for international developers outside China to meet the standard and produce the product or components for the final products to enter the Chinese markets. I think, for example, like in the second international sports games, we actually have many countries who are coming to Beijing to present their product for competition. And although China is a major player, it exports over 90% of these humanoid robots to the rest of the world. It actually, as the technology become more mature, the foreign robot makers, they could have a huge opportunity to cooperate with China based on the standard that is set up by the Chinese government.
Now, the draft guideline from the Chinese ministry we're talking about here, Professor Yao, it places safety, ethical issues, and social impact assessments alongside the performance of those robotics products. What do you think this tells us about China's approach in the governance of AI-driven robotics?
Yes, the standard can be divided into different categories. The first category is relating to safety and the potential risk. The second category about the ethical, standard, and also the efficiency of application to the actual world, and also the entire system, especially the AI model, which is connected into the humanoid robots. These are all, complicated consideration. But as the standards are categorized, then we become clear of where to focus. More and more robots are entering into our production, society, and also including the households. So the safety issue is very important. The economy issue is another important concern. And this standard will guide the concept principle where the robot developers have to focus on to, first of all, make sure it is safe and is ethically acceptable, and it can be applied to the real reality to produce economy welfare for the human being.
Yeah, this is really a holistic approach. But thank you very much for joining us, Professor Yao Shujie, joining us from Chongqing University. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.